solutions. The second area that we see are in places where traditional systems have been complemented with cloud. And we see this actually a lot in business applications, where instead of kind of refreshing the whole suite or the whole bundle of business applications, they'll look to cloud to add an additional module or capability to extend that capability of the application. And then, of course, the killer is the last one, where traditional systems are being retired and replaced by a cloud alternative. This is very dramatic, particularly in software, where some markets like customer relationship management, CRM software, have actually passed the tipping point now. Roughly 57% of spending on CRM systems is now delivered as a cloud service. So it's already hit that point where the traditional packaged software offerings of CRM have been eclipsed by cloud. And that's a foreshadow of the other markets that are kind of trailing that leader, where we'll see more and more of that spending being replaced by cloud. I wanted to share with you also some adoption statistics, because you might ask yourself, well, how far are we into this journey, right? How much of the shift has already occurred, and how much can we expect? So we asked people last year about their cloud plans, and we got some data back that showed two really interesting things. One showed the number on the left, or the right, your left, my right, showed the rate of cloud usage, cloud adoption, people who are using cloud. Last year was about 35% of organizations were really entrenched in using cloud. But note the aspiration was more than double that over the next couple of years. And this is a really interesting phenomenon, because the anticipation, the aspiration to leverage cloud continues to just be, through the roof. I will warn you that many organizations don't really fulfill on those aspirations, but they come close. So worldwide, there's some disparity. Now, this chart was much more beautiful back home in my office, where there was a map behind it, so you understood what these numbers actually align to. The numbers in the upper left is North America. So you can see the current rate of adoption is actually a little bit higher than the worldwide average. The aspiration is also high. Down at the lower left is Latin America. So the actual adoption is still higher than the worldwide average, but lower than the US. But look at the aspirations, even more aggressive. Up in the middle is Europe, a view of Europe. And interesting, you can see the rate of adoption and planned adoption is actually lower than other parts of the world. And there's a really important point that is drawn out by that particular number. Much of what people aspire to do in cloud is governed by, guess what? IT budgets. It turns out, to shift money to cloud, you have to have money to spend on cloud. And in many instances, that cloud shift also takes an investment in the engagements and the retraining and the deployment and implementation that represent kind of an incremental spend requirement to facilitate that shift. Some of the economic challenges in the Eurozone have reduced budgets and consequently have impacted cloud adoption. So in your businesses and your planning, that's a key indicator to watch. What is the rate of growth in IT budgets? In healthy economies where budgets are growing and are strong, those are going to be ripe opportunities for cloud shift. In more depressed economies, it's going to be probably deferred. And then the last area on the far right is spending in Asia, which kind of lands about in the middle, right kind of in the average. Now, the chart that I showed here in the middle is also very interesting. If you look at the rate of spending on cloud by key geography, and you'll notice that it is disproportionately weighted toward some of the major economies. Now, of course, it's not surprising, because most of the spending on IT generally, is sort of concentrated in North American and Western European markets. But if you take it in aggregate, you're looking at almost 90% of the market really concentrated in those two areas. So moving on, so how does this represent IT markets? And I think the key point here is that it impacts all markets. You may be sitting there thinking, well, we're not in a business where people are considering SaaS, or we have a pretty differentiated offering in infrastructure, or we have an outsourcing services that may be immune from this. Every market will be disrupted by cloud in some form, and we've seen this regardless of whether it's replacing a capital expense or whether it's replacing some sort of an operating expense. And so I think the key lesson here is that whether your market is directly or indirectly impacted by cloud, there will be an impact. So when does this happen? And I highlighted some of those examples of areas where we're seeing cloud shift. But there are events that are really important in our customer accounts that highlight those opportunities. And I call these IT spending or cloud shift triggers, right? These are moments when that decision is being made. Do I continue to invest in my traditional technologies, or do I shift and go to cloud? Well, an interesting statistic for you to consider, when we ask organizations who are using cloud services today, and this could be cloud services in any form, public or private, infrastructure, software, any organization that is using cloud today, 88% of them are saying, we have a cloud-first strategy. Now, a cloud-first strategy means that when they hit one of these trigger events, the first question they're going to ask is, can we do this in the cloud? So instead of buying a server, can I subscribe to a server in the cloud? Instead of buying software licenses or renewing software licenses, can I replace that with the cloud? So these are key events and moments in the lives of your customers. And interestingly, the opportunity will only surface when you are intimately connected to those IT spending events, and maybe even more so, influencing those spending events. It requires a different type of customer engagement than we've seen in the past. It's inadequate to show up and transact some business. Hey, Mr. Customer, it's time to renew your software license. I got your contract here. Let's just sign it, and I'll see you again next year. That model does not work here because your customers are in this state where they're really evaluating, what do we do? And they need guidance, they need advice, and they need somebody there to help direct this spend that will happen as a result of their cloud-first strategy. Now, the second thing I want to mention are these last two boxes on the right. There are also a lot of interesting changes happening relative to business models, right? A lot of organizations are pursuing digital strategies. They want more customer intimacy. They want more dynamic and agile operations. They're certainly pursuing optimization and efficiency initiatives. So the change in business models and change in sourcing strategies represent also these trigger events that result in spending redirected to cloud. Now, how does this shift actually occur? And I'm going to kind of illustrate this by talking about the existing markets at the top and the cloud markets at the bottom. And I've aligned these around Gartner's forecast taxonomy. And I did that first and foremost because that's the best way for us to analyze these markets. But it's also a set of models that you can use in your own investigation. We publish market size and forecast information about all these markets. So you can look at these and identify in which markets do we play and how do they compare relative to the cloud so that you can look at the cloud shift effect in your own businesses. Now, the first thing I want to highlight are a couple of direct shifts that happen related to cloud. And I've talked about some of these, but up in the top box, there's a little logic in there that describes kind of a little microprocess, right? This is the process they go through in thinking about how to direct that spend. And, they'll ask that question, should it be cloud? Should it not be cloud? If it's cloud, what kind of cloud should it be? In the case of private cloud, well, oftentimes they'll kind of keep that money internally. But in the case of public cloud, that money escapes from that traditional market and it redirects. Now, in the case of application software, it lands on software as a service. So if you're a software provider and there is a SaaS alternative that is not yours, that's a threat to you because some of that money is going to redirect to SaaS. Likewise, infrastructure software will redirect to various kinds of platform and management environments. Likewise, in the IT services space, some people are paying for IT outsourcing today. And much of that is redirecting toward infrastructure as a service. And the really interesting point here is that public cloud, in addition to being a new consumption model, is also an outsourcing model, right? So people who have paid for outsourcing services and managed services for their infrastructure, many of them will redirect that toward infrastructure as a service. Likewise, business process outsourcing redirects towards cloud versions of that. Now, there are other kinds of shifts. These dotted lines represent more of an indirect shift, where people may have bought something like a server or storage equipment or networking equipment, who may no longer have the need for that as they move their infrastructure into cloud. Likewise, things like operating systems and virtualization and so on shift to cloud. There's also a really interesting effect around some of these adjacent markets, like co-location services and hosting services, in addition to consulting and implementation, all of which have a cloud shift element, right? We already recognize that about 25% of the implementation services market is now cloud related. People are paying, 25% of that market is paying to help with implementation of cloud environments. So let me illustrate what this looks like in practice. And we have a couple of cloud shift examples. The first one is application software, and I mentioned the comparison between SaaS and traditional non-cloud software. But the first thing I'd illustrate here is the growth rate. Now, what's interesting about this is that 4.7% growth rate is actually, if you look at the software market in aggregate, is actually about 8%. So already we see that almost 4% of that software market is immediately, the growth that is immediately being redirected towards cloud, resulting in this high